And remember, you can ask questions and I'll answer them in real time. I know no one's watching that, so I guess I'll mention it a few more times as I do the show. Today we have a very interesting topic. A scientific study has found that kratom can alleviate all coronavirus symptoms rapidly and for a sustained amount of time. And yeah, so I'm not making this up. There's really a scientific study that says this, and I'll jump right into it here and before going into the rest of the issue. So the scientific study is titled, Can Kratom Alleviate COVID-19 Pain? A Case Study. And essentially in this study, there was a patient who was confirmed to have the coronavirus. They tested positive and they had all the symptoms, including a fever, malaise, which is like fatigue, pain and aches, myalgia, which is another form of pain, fatigue, and headache. So it's basically pain and fatigue and headaches and fever. That's like the general coronavirus symptoms, and this patient had them all. And they took kratom. So I guess I'll just read the abstract straight up. So it's among the symptoms of COVID-19, fever, pain and aches, fatigue, and headache. It can affect the quality of life of patients even after the end of the acute phase of the infection could be long-lasting. So what that is saying is basically that COVID-19, causes all these symptoms, and then even for months, the symptoms could continue even after the acute phase of the virus. Like it causes like damage to the body somehow, and it kind of stays in the body. And then the abstract of the scientific study goes on to say the current treatment of these symptoms also because COVID-19 patients have been asked not to use ibuprofen and other NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, are often unsatisfactory. So it's basically saying they don't really have a treatment for the symptoms of COVID. Like generally people would take like a Tylenol or an ibuprofen, but the problem is you can't take that stuff for an extended amount of time. It actually causes like holes in the stomach, God forbid, like ulceration, bleeding in the stomach, all sorts of problems like that. So, ibuprofen's good, but, and also it's even saying ibuprofen, it doesn't even work to begin with. So, yeah. So, like the regular drugs they would use to treat all these symptoms of pain and aches and fatigue from the coronavirus, it's not really working. And it doesn't sound like they're willing to give everyone opiates either for coronavirus. I don't think that's really happening. I haven't heard of that. I don't think anyone's getting Percocet or like Vicodin for their coronavirus symptoms. And then it also mentions that the malaise and the fatigue, which is, I think malaise basically means fatigue, it's the most difficult symptom to treat. And then it says, in this case, reporter, we described the use of kratom by a patient with confirmed COVID-19 infection. What we observed was a fast and sustained relief of the above-mentioned symptoms. So it's quite simple. And I want to stress, I know this is very controversial, that, in order to prove that kratom relieves all the coronavirus symptoms, it would require much more scientific studies. This is just the first study. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to get those studies. It's been like a year since the coronavirus started. We finally have a study which says that kratom, helps with the coronavirus symptoms. And by the way, this study is serious. It's from multiple universities, including University of Hertfordshire in the United Kingdom. It's from NHS, I think that's the National Health Service, Camden and Islington Trust. Department of Medico, Surgical Services and Biotechnologies, Sapienza University of Rome. It's from the University of Sains, Malaysia, and that's a well-known university that, studies kratom often. From the University of Florida, and that's another very famous university for their kratom research. And then Midwestern University, and yeah. So that's it. There's a bunch of universities in this study that have proven, and this study basically suggests it's not absolute proof that kratom cures the coronavirus, or the symptoms, I mean. But it's a start. It's saying they observed a patient who had COVID, and the kratom managed to get rid of all their symptoms. So that's major stuff. And they also say, once again, that there's nothing else that can really get rid of the coronavirus symptoms. Ibuprofen doesn't work. They're kind of like stumped. So people are living and suffering for months. If they get COVID, God forbid, they will be living sick for months and months. In fact, there's no defined time frame for when COVID goes away. Even some people, they never get better, really. So this could be groundbreaking if it is found and definitively proven that kratom gets rid of all the coronavirus symptoms. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to get that research. And I'll go into that in a little bit, why Big Pharma would not waste their time. I guess I should say it now. Basically, kratom cannot be patented. And this has been an issue with kratom in general. it would definitely be an approved treatment from the FDA by now and by Big Pharma. They'd be selling it if it wasn't for the fact they can't patent it. So since they can't patent it, and backing up a bit, it takes like $1 billion or like tens of millions of dollars to get a drug approved by the FDA for Big Pharma to start selling it, and they're not willing to spend all that money. And I think it's actually like $1 billion and takes years of effort. So no big pharma company is willing to like do all the studies it takes to get Kratom approved as a treatment for anything, even though it's confirmed Kratom works for chronic pain and opioid dependence. And this is just something else. Like we're gonna have more shows about how Kratom treats chronic pain and opioid dependence because that's a major thing. This is just a side thing, kind of. I mean, it's very important. Yeah. So big pharma is not going to do the research it takes to prove that Kratom cures coronavirus symptoms. They're not going to do that because even if they did it and they got Kratom approved for such a purpose, all the other big pharma companies would start selling it, and because they can't patent it, so it's not worth it for any particular company to patent to get Kratom approved as a treatment for anything. So yeah, just to summarize that once again, basically, since it takes $1 billion to get Kratom approved for use for anything, whether it be pain, opioid dependence, or COVID symptoms, no company's willing to spend that money because if they did spend $1 billion and they got Kratom approved, then every other company would just steal their idea because there's no patent on Kratom because Kratom is natural. All right, now back to the main point. It's not a big deal that there's going to be no more scientific studies. There might be some more, but it's not going to be enough to get Kratom approved. It's not going to be enough to get Kratom to even prove that Kratom is definitively a cure for all COVID symptoms. But we are allowed to use our common sense. Thank God we are in a free country. Even before this study came out, I speculated, even 9 months ago, I wrote an article, I believe, about how Kratom probably could be very useful for COVID symptoms because basically the COVID symptoms are fever and pain and fatigue. Aside from other symptoms like death, God forbid. But yeah, there's been a lot of reports on the internet of people that had COVID and then they took Kratom and then they were fine. Personally, I don't know if I've had COVID or not. Me and my wife have been sick at some points during this pandemic. But nowadays, it's kind of like paranoia. It's like back in the day, people would get sick throughout the year, like a few times maybe, and it would just be normal. Now it's like everyone thinks they have COVID if they got sick. So I don't know if I've had it or not, but all I do know definitively is that if I ever get sick or my wife gets sick with anything, whatever it may be, Kratom cures the problems. Not only does Kratom relieve the symptoms for me and my wife, it tends to cure any sickness we have, literally. So there's a lot more research that needs to be done. I think it's safe to say that Kratom could, alleviate any symptoms of a disease, like the flu or the cold or even COVID, because Kratom provides immense pain relief. It provides stress relief. And the key here is that Kratom, puts your body at rest. So the pain dies down, the stress dies down, and then you could rest and heal. In fact, for things like COVID, where there wasn't a cure for the whole year, and there still might not be. I don't really believe in this vaccine anyways. But so for things that you can't really cure them, what you want to do is treat the symptoms. That's what doctors do. There's plenty of diseases where they don't even know what the disease is, like I guess Crohn's disease and what's the other one? There's this pain disease where they don't know what it is. Well, I'm not going to try to think too long, but there's all sorts of syndromes out there where doctors don't know what they are, and they have no cure because they don't even know what causes it. And in those cases, the doctors aim to treat the symptoms, because if you treat the symptoms, then the patient can rest and heal. And if you don't treat the symptoms, God forbid, then the patient, they could get sick. They'll keep getting sicker because they have no time to rest, and then their immune system's constantly under attack. So basically, the key with treating stuff where doctors don't know how to cure it is to treat the symptoms so the patient can rest and heal. Because if you don't treat the symptoms, then the patient can't rest and then they can't heal. So obviously Kratom could be very good for that. And maybe that's why Kratom works every time I get sick or my wife gets sick, whether it's COVID, I don't know if we've had it or not, or the cold or the flu or whatever, anything. Because Kratom allows me to rest. It allows the pain to go away. It allows the stress to go away. It provides sedation so I can sleep and rest. Usually if I get sick, and I've taken Kratom for 10 years, well before this COVID was ever a thing. Every time I've ever gotten sick in the past 10 years, I take Kratom. Within a day, I'm better. Usually I'll take the Kratom, I'll go to sleep, I'll wake up, and I'm better. So to me, it's common sense that Kratom can alleviate COVID symptoms, if not help get rid of COVID if someone gets it, God forbid. Of course, there's very little proof, but there is a scientific study. I'll just show it on the screen. I don't know if it works very well trying to show this on the screen. Let me see. It's a real scientific study, though, that found that kratom can alleviate COVID symptoms rapidly and sustainedly. I don't know if that's a word, but, rapidly alleviates the symptoms, and then they go away for a long period of time. By the way, I see there's 5 people watching. You can ask me any questions you want. This is a live show, and I will answer them in real time. You can ask me anything about kratom. I'm just talking about this important issue for now, about COVID and kratom, because COVID's been like stumping the world, If someone gets COVID, even to this day, even though there is a vaccine out, if someone already has COVID, the vaccine is not going to do anything. So, the world needs solutions for COVID sickness. Like, what do doctors do when people get sick with COVID? Well, this new scientific study says, hey, they don't really have anything to treat the symptoms. They can't use ibuprofen. They're not going to start prescribing oxycodone either for symptoms. That wouldn't really help because that actually lowers the immune system. So, yeah, the world desperately needs solutions for COVID symptoms to help people have a better quality of life, to help people heal. And now this new scientific study, which came out from multiple prestigious universities, says kratom could be that solution. And even though this is very important, once again, I don't expect Big Pharma to spend any money on this, no matter how promising it is. We might see a few more studies just from the kratom scientists. There are some avid kratom scientists. There might be at least a dozen of them worldwide, particularly at the University of Florida and the University of Saints, Malaysia. There's some really top-notch kratom scientists that care about kratom, and they will keep doing studies. We'll probably see some more studies about how kratom can help with COVID from those people, but it's not going to be enough to prove anything. So that's, I don't want to start a controversy here and say kratom cures coronavirus symptoms, but there is scientific proof that suggests it's possibly that it does. So yeah, and once again, in this time, it's pretty intense in the world right now because, if someone gets the COVID, the doctors are like, okay, you're sick, they'll monitor them, then they put them in the hospital. And obviously the doctors aren't very good at curing COVID because a lot of people end up on the ventilator in the hospital, God forbid, or they die. So there's not really much they can do for the symptoms or curing it once someone has it. I theorize, and based on also the scientific study, that kratom could be very helpful. I don't think anyone has anything to lose by taking kratom if they get sick with COVID. I, of course, also have to say, probably as a legal disclaimer, if you have COVID, don't just take kratom. You can also seek advice from your doctor. I personally don't trust doctors very much. I've had some very bad experiences in my life with doctors personally, and with my mother. Like, they basically killed her. So, I don't trust doctors, but I think for legal purposes, I should say don't just use kratom. Also, you can go, you can go to the doctor and ask advice from them too. But kratom can be very helpful, and I think we all have a right to use something that could be helpful. Kratom has been proven to be safe. It has never killed anyone in history. And once again, it's just a leaf from a tree. I got some right here. This is what kratom leaves look like. So anyways, there's now scientific evidence, a scientific study which suggests kratom can alleviate all the COVID symptoms. It's also common sense because kratom is a major painkiller. It's a stress reliever. So the common sense and also the subjective evidence, people online posting that they got COVID and then they took kratom and then they were better. And I even got a story about that. So I'm going to tell this story. So I have a friend named Manny. And at the very beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, I believe it was in February. It was around the time where no one even thought COVID was in the U.S. yet. The government was trying to say it's not here yet. I don't know if you guys all remember that, but even Donald Trump, our president, stood up and said, oh, the COVID's not happening here. It's not going to spread. We got it contained. I don't know if you guys remember that press conference at the beginning, but it was around that time in February or January. Anyways, my friend Manny probably had COVID big time. He was getting sicker and sicker. And later on, they discovered there was COVID in our area around the time he had it, but they just didn't know yet, or they didn't put it on the news yet. So anyways, he had it. He had it for sure. And he was getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And it was getting to the point he was going to have to go to the hospital. And this is a guy that doesn't believe in doctors. He doesn't want to go to the hospital, but he was about to die, God forbid. He couldn't breathe anymore. It was crazy. And then I was like, Manny, I gave you some kratom. I was like, Manny, every time I get sick, I take kratom. Just take some of the kratom I gave you in the past, because he had a little supply I gave him. He took it within about a day or two. He was totally better. He went from the brink of about to die. And God forbid, I think if he didn't take it, he might have ended up in the hospital on a ventilator and be one of the first COVID cases here. that was like, in the hospital. Instead, he took some Kratom and lived. Me and my wife have gotten very sick a couple times during this pandemic. We don't know if it was COVID, and indeed the flu still exists, the cold still exists. There's 1,000 diseases that still exist that people have always gotten since ancient times. So I have no idea if I had COVID or not, but I took Kratom. I was fine. I'm not saying that it's going to work for everyone, but it's definitely something at least Kratom users should try. It actually gives me a lot of peace of mind. If I didn't have Kratom, I'd be pretty scared of COVID. I'd feel like I'd have nothing to fall back on, especially since I have no health insurance. And most Americans, I think most people don't have health insurance. So anyways, Kratom is my health insurance. And that might be a controversial thing to say, but if I have ever any pains, any sickness, I take Kratom and it works. Even my wife, it works for her. So it makes me have some peace of mind. And then the scientific study, once again, I'm talking about an actual scientific study from like multiple prestigious universities where they studied someone who had COVID and they took Kratom and then they were fine. Their symptoms went away rapidly and they went away permanently. No more symptoms. And I think this obviously deserves further research. Someone's asking me, I got my first comment on the show, is Kratom a zinc ionophore, like green tea? I have no idea what that means. That's very interesting. Zinc ionophore. I don't know if you could explain what that means, but I'm going to look it up real quick. It's definitely something. A zinc ionophore or zinc transporters in and out of the cell and can increase the effects of zinc in the cell. I don't know. And I've read most of the Kratom scientific studies, and I don't believe there's been a study on this yet. It's possible. Maybe not. Maybe so. I don't know. Thank you for asking the first question in the history of the show, though. You feel free to ask more, by the way. As far as what Kratom contains, I guess I've talked enough about Kratom and COVID. Hopefully the message gets across that, hey, it's something that could possibly help. That's all I want to say. There's a scientific study now which suggests it could really alleviate all the symptoms of coronavirus. There's also subjective reports all over the internet. Whenever I've discussed this on the internet, whether it be Facebook or Reddit or Twitter, I've heard people commenting back, hey, I had COVID, I took Kratom, and I was better. So there's subjective evidence. There's at least one scientific study, and it's also common sense because Kratom relieves pain and relieves stress. For all these reasons, and also the fact that Kratom is completely safe, I think it's a good idea to use Kratom if you get sick of anything, to be honest. Of course, always go to a doctor too, especially if things are serious. But Kratom is a useful tool, possibly even for coronavirus. So that's all I want to say about that. And to get into some of the things that are in Kratom that make it so helpful. Well, see, it's a simple leaf, but it's not so simple. So here's an actual leaf. I grew it in my own house. I think I'll do a show from my phone one of these days where, I film the Kratom tree I have. Anyways, I picked this myself. This simple leaf here contains over 50 alkaloids. The one people talk about the most is metragine, but there's over 50 alkaloids, and there's actually some evidence that some of them have antiviral properties, immunostimulant properties, and based on my own experience, I think it's obvious that Kratom boosts the immune system in a real way, like where if I'm sick with something, it helps wipe out the sickness, wipe out the bacteria. It's proven that Kratom is antibacterial. There's a few scientific studies where they put Kratom in a petri dish, and then the bacteria all died in the petri dish just from Kratom being in there. In fact, one of the scientific studies even suggests that you should make a Kratom cream and rub it on your face if you have acne. And that's probably a real thing based on the evidence I saw. Aside from that, it could be antiviral. There needs to be some studies on that. There's not much studies yet on Kratom's antiviral abilities. But based on my own experiences, wherever I had the cold or the flu, maybe even COVID, it helped. And also some of the alkaloids in Kratom have been researched separately because Kratom has some alkaloids that are also found in other plants elsewhere in nature. So some of the alkaloids have been proven to have antiviral properties. It's just there's been no specific research on Kratom's antiviral properties. Basically, Kratom research is just beginning. Aside from that, Kratom has sedative effects, pain relieving effects, anxiety and stress relieving effects. I actually call it a cure-all. That's controversial to say. But honestly, kind of like Popeye with his spinach, I'm like that with Kratom. If I have any problems, whether it's mental problems or physical problems, I take Kratom, and it seems to cure it for me. I could say that. I have freedom of speech. I could say it does cure all my problems, mental and physical. Not by itself, of course. You got to also have a healthy lifestyle in general, but Kratom is a major herbal tool. And besides all the alkaloids, over 50 alkaloids are in Kratom. It also has flavonoids, and this is something most people don't know. It has flavonoids, tannins, and phenolic compounds. So most people think alkaloids when they think medicinal benefits of kratom. It actually has a bunch of other types of molecules that are also biochemicals, like alkaloids, that have their own unique benefits. And these are flavonoids, tannins, and phenolic compounds. And the research into that is just beginning. Basically, the only scientific study to date happened like maybe a month ago, I believe, that kratom does contain flavonoids, tannins, and phenolic compounds, and that they are in kratom, and that those compounds are known from other studies from other plants to like have powerful antioxidant and antibacterial and antiviral effects. So that's just beginning. The only research to date on those other compounds besides alkaloids and kratom is that they exist in kratom. There's been no actual research specifically on kratom yet for that stuff. So yeah, alkaloids, flavonoids, tannins, phenolic compounds, and other stuff probably too. Kratom contains probably at least 100 beneficial molecules, biochemicals, medicines, whatever you want to call them. It's really a miracle. And I guess I'm doing so many topics in one show. Every show might be like this, actually. And by the way, feel free to ask questions. I'm a kratom expert, and I will answer any questions, and I really appreciate questions. Yeah, I guess that might be all for the show unless someone has some questions. I just really wanted to get the message across that there is now a scientific study that suggests strongly that kratom could be useful for curing coronavirus symptoms, not for curing the actual virus, but for like alleviating the symptoms rapidly. Basically, the scientific study has proven that someone took kratom that was like had a really bad case of COVID where they had all the symptoms. The symptoms went away like that. And indeed, that's my experience. Whenever I get sick for the past 10 years, I take kratom and I'm fine. And there's so much other amazing things to discuss about kratom. The antioxidant effects are amazing on their own. It might even like help prevent aging because of the antioxidant effects and all that. So there's many more shows to come on this kratomcafe.com live show. Might even be one later today. I think that's all for now, though. I just wanted to get that message across about this scientific study once again, just so you guys can look it up later if you want to. I'll try to point it at the screen here. It's on PubMed, pretty official database. Just trying to point to the screen where you guys could see it. There we go. Can kratom, Metrogenous speciosa, alleviate COVID-19 pain? A case study. And it talks about actually not just pain, it alleviates all the symptoms according to the scientific study. So you can look that up on your own. I'm not making this up. I'm not just pulling this out of thin air. That's the only reason I'm talking about this because this scientific study just came out from multiple prestigious universities. All right, that's all I have for this time. Thank you for watching. And I'll be back maybe later tonight or early tomorrow. All right, have a good one, everyone. And remember to take your leafy green kratom. Keep you healthy. See you later.